Hi, shalom, friends. I'm sure you have all heard the statement, mind your own business. In the vast majority of times, it's actually said as a brush off, like, stop interfering with my life. But if you actually listen to the message carefully, you'll see there's a lot of truth and importance to that. If we were to mind our own business, we would be quite successful. Case in point, a famous story about a man who comes to a very learned rabbi, and he complains that his competitor who's down the block is stealing all of his customers. Of course, the rabbi says to him, how do you know he's stealing all of your customers? He says, well, it's very simple. Hardly anyone comes to my store, and everyone is going to his store. To which the rabbi responded, how do you know that they're going to his store? Maybe there's just no customers. He says, what are you talking about? I'm watching the whole time. As a matter of fact, I've counted from 9 in the morning until 12 in noon, maybe 18 people. So the rabbi looked at him and said, now I know why you're not doing any business. He's successful because he's minding his own business. So he has one business to take care of, so he's catering to his customers. But you have your own business, but you seem to be minding his business. Concentrate on making your merchandise attractive. Concentrate on your business. You'll be successful. Well, let's take this one step further. There's a young couple coming to premarital counseling with their rabbi, and the rabbi, before performing the marriage, tells them, listen here, marriage is not that easy. However, if you keep some simple fundamental rules, you'll be very successful and very happy. And he turns to the man. He says, the simple rule is treat your wife like a queen. And he says, Rabbi, well, what does that mean? He says, well, I'll give you some simple things. A queen should not be overworked. So make sure that you help out in the house. A queen, even if you disagree with a queen, it's done respectfully. So respectfully disagree. And most of all, a queen has to be reminded that she's a queen and appreciated as a queen. So do that to your wife. Then he turns to the bride and says, a very simple formula, treat him like a king. Like a king? Well, what does that mean? Well, a king has a desire, the people try to fulfill it. Your husband wants something, see if you could fulfill it. A king gets honor, show honor. When he comes home, ask him how his day was. You'll treat him like a king, you'll be happy. Performs the marriage 3 months later. They come in very upset. Sits them down, he says, what's the problem? And he begins, Rabbi, she's not doing her job. He says, what are you talking about? She's supposed to treat me like a king. She's not. And turns to the wife. And you, Rabbi, he's not doing his job. He's supposed to treat me like a queen. He's not. What's the problem over here, friends? Well, it's obvious. Each one is minding the other one's business. Each one's marking what the other one is supposed to be doing. If they were only to mind their own business, if they were to do what they were supposed to do, they would actually have a very, very happy marriage. Which leads me to the main point of this YouTube. When I listen to a lot of the pronouncements, especially the pronouncements which have to do with global warming and climate change, and I hear these massive scenarios. I hear about polar ice caps melting. I hear about changes of climate and of weather and global transformations. And I hear that even though we're limited in our resources, but if all of the people, all 7 billion people of this planet would change their usage of energy and change their attitudes towards the environment, we can make a dent in changing and forestalling and protecting, and we don't have to worry about global warming, or at least not to the extent of the doomsday scenarios. And I was thinking to myself, after reading the story of the flood, God promised Noah, and he said, I will never flood the world again. And there are cold and hot, and winter and summer, and a time to plant and a time to reap, and I will not disrupt that. Certainly not on a universal scale. And I'm thinking to myself, if we were to divide responsibilities between mankind and God, where do you think the word life would fit in? Is it man's responsibility to create life? Or is it God's responsibility to create life? If all of the great scientists in the world would gather together, can they create life? Well, if I were to ask a different question, who is responsible to make sure that the poor have enough resources to live on? Is it God's responsibility or man's responsibility? Now you have to think about this for a moment. I'll tell you the Jewish perspective. God says, you worry about the poor, let me worry about life. You should give 10% or 20% of your assets to help the poor and allow me to make the barren woman have children and to make things grow. Hashem says, why don't you take care of the orphan and of the widow, and let me take care of the sun shining and the rain falling in its proper time? If we could only mind our business, if we were only to keep the Torah, or to loosely say, if the world would only keep the 10 commandments, do not murder, and do not commit adultery, and do not tell lies, and especially in court, and do not be covetous of your neighbor. If we would only do our responsibility, I am convinced that God, who does his responsibility responsibly, we would see that. As it says in the Torah itself, follow in my ways, I will make it rain. Let's stop and consider a scenario. Instead of making a world conference and making sure that the carbon emissions go down, could you imagine if some of the most powerful nations on earth would gather together and come up with the following resolution? The first year, they're going to cut down 50% of vulgarity on the airwaves. And after that, every year afterwards, they will cut down another 10%. Could you imagine a world without language that's vulgar? Or another possibility. They all get together and they say, there's a lot of unsavory, unhealthy, unwholesome TV shows. So why don't we all decide, for the benefit of the world, to cut down 50% on these trashy shows, and then afterwards to increase 10% per year. And in the meantime, to offset that, we'll make decent shows that espouse goodness and morality, or what loosely used to be called family values. Could you imagine the change, the climate change in a spiritual sense of this world? It's not that unreasonable to ask for something like that, because that is our business. And then we would be privileged to see a world where God's blessing is revealed. The sun does shine, the rain does fall, life is given, and we would see it much more with a clarity, and we would appreciate it so much more. Global warming, warm up the world with mitzvahs, with enthusiasm, with helping one another. So how am I going to conclude? With the way I started. Go out and mind your own business. Don't worry about me being religious. Don't worry about me being moral. Don't look at me and say, am I fulfilling my obligation? Why don't you work the other way around? Mind your own business. Why don't you do what you have to do? And then I will learn from you by example. Teach by example. Shalom and good luck.